We are here with the next month's episode of Move the Needle. I am here with my co-host JR Ford. Mr. Ford, sir, how are you doing?
I am doing well. How are you, man?
Hey, man, I can't complain. We are rounding the corner to spring.
Yeah.
I'm tired of the cold weather, but before we get too deep into that, in the intro, I know our listeners heard that we have a guest today. So I'm going to introduce our guest, Dakota Cody, man. Thank you for joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you both for having me. It's a honor and a privilege. I'm excited to be here. I've been looking forward to getting a chance to work with the both of you. So it's really
awesome,
great, man.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, don't thank us yet because you haven't heard the questions. So.
I guess that's true.
We will take the thank you already.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, just kidding, man. So yeah, you know what, Dakota, why don't you go ahead and start us off, man? Just tell us a little bit about you, and I think it's important. But before you, I'm cutting you off already, so I'm sorry. But before you start, like a lot of times on Move the Needle, what we've come from the perspective has been from Black men, or with my previous co-hosts, it was still more of a black and white perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what it's all about. There is a lot of inequity and racism and disparity across the board. And so I thought it was important to, have this episode with you as you identify as Indigenous and Creole. And so I think that's an awesome point to start with, is that, there is a shared experience. So with that, I would love for you to, give us your story and your background.
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, I'm Dakota. I'm 35 years old, so I'm starting to finally move into some adult maturity. I'm finally starting to get adulting down a little bit.
It's overrated, man. Trust me.
Very much so. I can tell. The signs were all there early on.
Yeah.
But no, it's like you said, I'm Indigenous and Creole. So I have like the Latin background, the European, Spanish, and French background. I have, African ancestry, and of course, Indigenous ancestry. And my Indigenous ancestry being my most prominent. But because of that mixed nature, you kind of get kind of a little bit of a broader spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't easily fit into one little box and category. And if that's one thing that we understand as people of color, as melanated peoples, is that America loves to kind of put you in a box and say, you're this, you're that. You can't do this, you can't do that,
It makes it comfortable when you're in that box, when it's something that you don't understand. Well, if I can categorize you as this, not only will I be able to understand you, but I can probably control you a little bit better. But continue.
Yeah, and it's a perfect opportunity to allow all those preconceived notions and assumptions that a society or an individual already has. Let those things just already be the baseline, because you're in this box, you're in box A, so I know that this, that, and the other thing about you, regardless of whether it's true or not. So being a mixed individual by nature, you kind of already don't fit in that. And so it kind of, in my opinion, it gives you a very kind of broad, reflective, just kind of sense of things. Because you kind of have to learn to navigate, well, yes, maybe I'm this box, but also I'm this box. And so you learn to tightrope a little bit and do a little bit of juggling. And I think because of that just always made me conscientious and interested in engaging in, stuff to do with, anti-racism, cultural appropriation, right, representation. So I was always kind of fighting from that, even before I realized that's what I was fighting for early on when I was young.
Sure.
Being out here on the West Coast, being in California, it can feel like the Native American community is very, very like isolated, because we don't have that same kind of established history in like the social context, the pop culture context of like the Plains Indians, right, and all those things, because that's Old West history is that's the image, the Indian riding around bare chested on the horse and war whooping.
Wait, you mean that's not real? That's
Well, I mean, I do that every morning when I wake up. That is my first thing that I do. But don't put us in a box, Lee. Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
not a box.
Keep the box open, Lee. Keep the box open.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But yeah, no. So and so the California tribes, by and large, a lot of times, they got kind of like displaced by the Spanish settlers so quickly that their language was just evaporated almost immediately. And that's not to take away from the tribes that are here that are still thriving tribes now, even a lot of times, and doing so much in decolonizing and re-engaging in their own culture. I mean, you're talking about, was it San Manuel Casino just changed their name back to their indigenous language of Yavapai.
Nice.
They're saying like Yavapai of San Manuel, so they're kind of like decolonizing, reestablishing their indigeneity, which is a great thing. But especially growing up, going through the 80s and the 90s, it was real easy to kind of feel like I was the lone token, which I'm sure a lot of people have come and totally understand.
I think we have both felt that that token type of feeling. Absolutely.
It's the American way of life.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like just trying to navigate and find a way to kind of play the race politics, so to speak. Especially out here in Southern California, where that has been an issue. Obviously, like you look back at like the '92 riots and stuff like that. Like, and of course, those are things that are just facts all across the nation. Every state has that history. And so it was something that, like I said, I was always aware of. It had always impacted my life, but I didn't realize how much it was something that I found purpose in fighting and advocating for until I became older. After, my fiance and I, Peaches, who, Lee, when her and I got together, I mean, I'd done a little bit of activism before that, like going out and participating in marches, speaking out, doing that stuff. Of course, now with social media presence being online and advocating, I kind of always done that. But, it took such a jump in importance once we had our son, which Peaches and I had our son. And it was all of a sudden, it was this thing that just like I do for, what do they call it? Like prosperity, for equity for all, is now all of a sudden so much more
meaning.
Yeah, it just has such a deeper meaning.
I know one of the things that we've talked about too is we may not see the changes that we're fighting for and the education that we're trying to provide in a way that is non-judgmental but all important. We may not see those changes in our lifetime, and I'm well aware of that, right? But it's pretty much where the name of the podcast came from, Move the Needle. If everything that we are doing, everything that we are bringing to light, everyone that can become enlightened from our conversations and information, if we can move that needle one, maybe two notches further than where it is, then like you had your son, I have a daughter, JR's got kids. They won't have to start from where we've started. Like we're not starting from where the folks in front of us, not just ancestors, but we're picking up from where they left off. So
exactly.
I love that, man. I love that.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask a question. Unless JR, you got any questions so far for Dakota?
I have a few, but you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dakota, man, just a quick question. If you can go back to maybe like your childhood, right? Because you grew up in California also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, LA County, all that area. So
can you kind of give an example of maybe the first time that you encountered like the whole token issue, right? Just kind of briefly talk about that, because that would be interesting to hear. I'm from the Midwest, JR's from the East Coast. And so, obviously that's a different region than we're used to, but just kind of talk about that. What was the situation, and, how did that even come about?
Yeah. Well, I think the time that most stands out to me, ironically enough, I don't remember specifically my age or what grade I was in. I know it was in school.
Okay.
And it was in school because I remember it must have been right around like third or fourth grade, right around that time. And we were kind of studying for the first time like Native American history. And I remember
everybody turned around and looked at you.
Yep,
They're like, "Hey."
that was
So,
and I remember
resident
because
indigenous person, can you?
yes, and that was the thing, man. Because I remember being in class, and I sit like, because obviously, like they would a lot of times teach would sit you alphabetically, and so I was in like the back left hand corner, right, because of my last name starting with Q. And so I was like in that back left-hand corner. So I had almost I got that like, TV moment where it's like, they say it, they're like, oh, Native American history. And literally the whole class turns, just pans over. And it's like all eyes on me. And I was like, yep, that's me. And just the not understanding at that age, not knowing how to articulate the comedy and / tragedy of everybody looking for you to be like, okay, well, is this true? And like, or is this thing not true? Or just like all that weight and responsibility kind of thrown on you. And like, like 10 years old, roughly, kind of just being like, I don't know, but feeling like, but understanding that sensation of feeling like, but I don't know, it's inadequate because I am a representation of this culture and these people. And so it's like, what do I do? But so that would definitely be like my very first earliest memory of it.
Wow. Yeah. And see, that's kind of the point of when we talk about Black and brown people or people of color. It is such a shared experience. It might be differences obviously here and there with ancestry and background, but it is such a shared experience with like that which you just said.
Being the only one has certainly in my adult life has certainly been kind of keenly on the radar like every single day, and especially for the kids. Can you talk a little bit about, and I know we're going to kind of progress through this, but can you talk a little bit about when you became even more aware as an adult about just the navigating through life as someone who, is an adult, and you have just more awareness and more knowledge about who you are and what the navigation kind of looked like as you started to become an adult?
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of started a little bit early on for me, maybe compared to some people, just because when I was in high school, I was going to high school in a county in Southern California called San Bernardino County. And although there's definitely a lot of mixed areas throughout San Bernardino, the school district I was in was predominantly white. And so it was like predominantly enough white to the point where it was like probably 90% of the school demographic was white. And then like the other 10% was like, Hispanic, and then a couple of everybody else, a couple Asian. It was literally just threw everyone else in there. The non-whites, and then the white student. And so I remember when in one of my classes, I think I was maybe like a junior, I had a student who went on a little rant. You think about this is back to the time of like, George Bush presidency. And he went on a little rant about wetbacks, and I apologize to use a derogatory term, but that's what the terminology he was using.
Of course.
And so I called him out on it,
of course,
because I was like, this is BS. We're in the middle of class. How is he just getting to go on this little racist tirade? And so I called him out on it. And I remember because he turned to me, he's like, oh, well, you might not be a dirty Mexican. He's like, but you're no better. And I got up out my seat. I flew off the handle. I swung on him. I started cussing, and I got kicked out of class and sent to the principal's office and reprimanded. And homeboy just sat in class, went on about his day. And it was one of those things where it was all of a sudden, and it was one of those things like you always kind of know, I think, as a melanated person, as a person of color, you always kind of know you have different rules that you have to operate by.
Right.
But that was my first instant as, quote, an adult, where all of a sudden I realized like, oh, my consequences are very different. Because I got suspended. I got sitting there, and it was one of those things where they were like, oh, okay, well, you have to go sit down and talk to the counselor about what happened, and like that's unacceptable. The whole old, just sticks and stones, but words shouldn't never hurt you, and you should have responded. And it was just like, but the dude literally, like, I'm like, nobody want to talk to him about like
in class. So, like you said, not just started talking about wetbacks, but then like it kept going. Like, it was like,
the audacity.
And it was just, and beyond that, it was recognizing that knowing that I had, quote, friends in that class, right?
Sure.
Other, white kids who were, quote, my friends. We hung out, we played together, we did things after school together, and they didn't speak up for me or advocate for me or in defense of me, or even try to go to the principal or the counselor afterwards and be like, hey, you know what, that wasn't fair. Like Dakota was just, he was in the right. It was, oh, well, you know what? Majority speaking and mum's the word otherwise. So it was just the teacher was just kind of like nodding along, like good points,
Oh man,
it's like I found myself in that moment, like living the bizarre world that is, structural and institutional racism.
Yep.
Where you just
we are not the same. Yep.
Yeah. It's like,
that the system didn't change.
Yeah.
It was just a difference of who it was against that time.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And so.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and then that just kind of that was I don't want to say that was the rude awakening, because like I said, it was always something that I was always a little bit aware of, but that was kind of the point where it really, like I said, and to revert back to what you were alluding to, JR, it cemented in my, quote, adulthood that like, this is something I have to be conscientious of going forward into my adulthood, because I have to be aware all the time that the consequences and the responsibilities for me as a man of color are going to be different,
completely different.
And so it was
a rude awakening.
It was, and it is something that it really drove me to understand how can I navigate the white world, so that way I can still try to be a voice for decency and equity and fairness and justice and anti-racism, but not paint a target on my back all the time.
Right.
Right.
Or you mean an extra target, because
an extra target. That's very true.
Already one. But well, the target on your back, you don't want to put the target on your front now.
Because I got the target on the back, and I want to put the bullseye right and square it in the middle of the chest.
Wow. I was gonna say that reminds me of just recently there was a video going around where, I mean, so we're talking, you said that was in high school, right?
So we're talking like, early 2000s.
Right. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. It's insane to think. I was on social media and saw, was it DL?
I think I know which video.
It was in South Carolina. I guess there was like a birthday party, and the white guy, there was a black guy around sitting on the bar, and white guy said something, called him the N-word. Black guy got up and was slapping the Jesus out of this guy. And I mean, I'm not going to continue the video, but it amazes me, and not really, but literally what you're talking about, you went through in high school 15, 20 years ago, that now 2022 we're still seeing this. Like and it's okay, and it's not, I mean, obviously it's not okay.
It's not
right. But in South Carolina, this guy felt comfortable enough to say that, and I mean, I think he got the sense knocked out of him and then knocked back into him, because he got back up and was like going for more. And it's like, dude, be lucky that he didn't close his hand, because he would have done some more damage. But anyway, that just reminded me of that. Like, when is it that it becomes, well, that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother podcast. So I don't even know if I can even finish that question, because clearly people still have their views. Wow, man. So at what point, Dakota, did you feel, you talked about navigating, right? You learned that the rules are different for us and for them, right? And I'm using air quotes, folks. And at what point and how did you think you started advocating more than just, if you did more than just one-to-one, right? Like now as an adult, I take every interaction I have, I don't take it for granted, right? Whether it could be the first and only time I come across this person, or who knows, maybe I begin to work with them on something. So if at any point my interaction with someone changes their opinion for that small moment to make them think the next time they interact with a person of color, that's my question. at what point do you feel if you started advocating more than just like one-to-one interactions?
Mhm.
When do you think you started picking up more with your advocacy for equity?
Yeah, it would probably be honestly pretty early on, like in my early 20s. You know, I've you know, been very, very blessed and fortunate that I've used boxing and martial arts and fight sports as one of my ways to kind of deal with, you know, stresses and kind of get all that pent up energy that can build up, you know, dealing with society. And
the heavy bag don't care.
The heavy bag don't care, you know, and you know, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to fight and compete over my life, and I've fought in even various forms of martial arts, competed in various forms of martial arts, you know, and I've really, really always loved and enjoyed doing that. And it's so funny because sports is such a unifier, right? To be really, really cliche. But at the same time, though, just because sporting events and sports themselves can be a unifier doesn't mean that those categories and those institutions evaporate or disappear, right? You can people will kind of kumbaya all they want and be like, oh yeah, sports brings everybody together, then everything's harmony, and then all those things just vanish. And that's not true. Those things are still there. Those institutions are still established, but it's a lot of times within the moment we put that to the side and say, oh, okay, well, it's just, you know, mano a mano, it's you know, one-on-one
against team,
team against team, it's you know, quote, level playing field, you know, to throw a little pun in there. but it's funny because I started recognizing and noticing that even within the fight world, there was so much kind of I don't want to say like judgment or bias, but there was an association of your ethnicity or your nationality to how you were going to fight or how you were going to compete. You know, I mean, if you're familiar with like sports broadcasting all the time, they'll even still on national broadcast refer to as like, oh, they're fighting in the Mexican style, boxing in the Mexican style, or this person has that, you know, that black kind of slick style. And it's like, you know, those are just,
they do that a lot. Yeah.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu, even though that's a thing, but you
know, and there's definitely obviously a lot of times cultural and national ties to a discipline, right? It's not to ignore those things, but it's also though, again, you know, that whole conflict of like being a monolith, right, as a person of color, where it's like, oh, just because this person might be from, you know, like Juarez, Mexico, does not mean that they're going to, you know, do the, you know, chin down, bowl forward, and just bang to the body. You know, like that's they are an individual. They have their own unique talents and capabilities. And an athlete, they might box this way or that way. They, you know, there's but the assumption is you'll be in the ring,
extra tough and extra resilient, right?
Yes,
because you're,
you know, you know,
that's wow. No, that's no different than it's no different than sports. I mean, we can tell you many stories of I don't know if I told this story before on this podcast, but it reminds me of when I first got to college, and you know, we're playing pickup basketball, right? And of course, you know, black guys are better athletes. I mean, that's just that's a known fact, right?
Universal truth.
Of course,
more gritty, you know,
like
it's like
gravity.
Hard working,
tongue in cheek, folks. Tongue in cheek. Don't get all upset.
Very much so.
But so we're playing ball. Me and one of my friends and his dad is playing with us, right? Playing again, and you know, one of the local guys. He's not in college, but he's from the town where I went to school. So we're playing, and I have to say, I'm lighting him up. Right? So, of course, and he was white. So the one thing that he used to get back at me, and I remember it clearly. He said something like, "Well, yeah, at least I'm not flunking out of school and getting deep." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute! I'm the one that's sitting here paying tuition." You're not even in school. You live here. But like you said from your high school story, right? Or even grade school. Like, man, I was hot. You know, I was ready to not play anymore and take care of business. But the coolest thing that I ever saw was the way that my friend's dad dealt with this, right? So obviously he cooled us all down. He's like boys, look, all right, I'll take care of this. I was like, no, let me. He's like, no, I got it. So we continue playing, and my friend's dad then guarded the guy, and you typically guard the guy who's guarding you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for the next, I don't know, whatever, how many points, man, point after point after point, my friend's dad started lighting him up. And then all the way around the court, like just, you D'ing him up and not letting him breathe and that kind of thing. Finally, when the game is over, he was like, yeah, these are my boys. Don't F with them again. Not cool. And I was like, huh. All right. Now, again, didn't let us fight because, again, my friend's dad recognized we're in college. We're trying to, get our education, do that thing. And here we are being faced with that again, right?
Yeah.
Now, there was no fight, anything like that. But he took the high road instead of letting me get in trouble for something I would have been defending myself over, and like you said, the rules are different, right?
Yeah.
But man, like again, we're talking about sports. That thinking about that now cracks me up. Mm-hmm. This guy, I'm the one that's in college, and he's sitting there telling me, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Now he may have dropped the N-word at some point. I don't remember. That was years ago, but yeah, man. Incredible.
So you think of sports as a great equalizer, right? Here in America, it kind of level sets, ability and skills and talent and, even fandom. You talked about the different, styles, that are, typically taken from, different cultures and different ethnicities, kind of taking what you learned through the fight sports that you identified. What are some of the lessons that you've taken from that and I guess have maybe applied to, outside of sports, with your activism and just being kind of a, not a bystander, but an outstanding, an outstander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think I apply a lot of that. One, I think is the sense of self-assuredness and self-confidence of knowing that you can take care of yourself in a situation if something does go down.
Yeah.
It's beneficial that if I'm going to be on the front lines, if I'm be out marching and a lot of times you're facing pushback and physical violence, from institutions, the police, whatever it might be, obviously nowadays, we know there's that big problem with, militias, white militias kind of, rallying up and coming to counter protest, to use that little term. But to have that self-assuredness that sends, forgive me for the street noise there, but
no, it's all good. You can't control the planes.
But to have that self-assuredness of knowing that, like, I can take care of myself, I can protect myself, and I can protect or try to do my part to help protect those that are around me if need be. And of course, you're always hoping that it doesn't devolve to that, but it does. Unfortunately, we know that it does. But then beyond that too, just that sense of dedication and focus and resiliency that you have to have to be an athlete, any kind of athlete, but especially in the fight world. Because just a moment of lapsed judgment and you're on your backside. Right. And so to try to be able to apply those things into understanding where are we going to be, where's the route going, what kind of emergency context do we need to have somebody who's available that has first aid supplies or first aid, like trauma knowledge to how to treat people if they get injured, even if it's not something because of conflict, but if people tumble, people get stepped on, people, when you get large masses and large groups of people, accidents happen. And then just the kind of ability to, like I said, have that focus, have that attention to detail, and then also too to have that ability to kind of stay level-headed, because it's definitely one thing you learn as a fight athlete is to kind of just tune everything else out and focus on the objective, what's in front of you. And that can even just be important, even just in navigating, in a big crowd. I know I've had times where, we've been marching down in Los Angeles, down through the streets of LA, and you're in a crowd of, 20, 30,000 people. And it's like, I'm here with 2 or 3 people. I need to be able to make sure that I can focus in and go, hey, where did you go at, where did you kind of osmose into within the sea of people? So I think that is definitely something that I use, in my advocacy, but also too, even in just everyday life, it's just that ability to kind of just, grit your teeth, buckle down and say, okay, well, now's the moment to kind of tough it out, focus in and do what you got to do.
I love that, man. Great question, JR. I love the one thing that stuck out to me, Dakota, was the dedication, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're talking about with the whole fight against inequity. And again, not just racism, but classism, the whole gender battle going on, all those things. It's going to require dedication from everybody to do and look first inward, but to really understand what's right. That's what we're talking about here. Hey, you guys, I think this is a great time. We take a break here. Dakota, thank you so much for giving us like your background, right? When we come back from the break, guys, I want to have a discussion around assimilation and inclusion. How do you guys feel about that?
Very good conversation.
Sounds good.
All right. All right, folks, hang tight. We'll be right back. All right, folks, welcome back from the break. This is Move the Needle. This is Lee and JR here with Dakota. We enjoyed learning about Dakota in that first segment, folks. But now we want to jump into a quick conversation, and I'm going to toss it to you guys. We want to have this conversation about assimilation versus inclusion. And folks, a lot of times that we have conversations in the break or pre-show, that kind of thing. So I want to give you guys a little bit of peel the curtain back a little bit. There was a great conversation that we had in the break, like what assimilation or inclusion, like how we all feel about it, and just different experiences. Dakota, you were mentioning like a video that you'd seen from your fiance, and it was talking a young Black woman talking about years ago, not now, how she's tired of having to educate her white friends and educate and tell them what this experience is like, and didn't want to include them anymore, was cutting them out of her lives, So I guess I'll jump off that platform there with the conversation here. But folks, this is what Move the Needle is about. We want to have these difficult conversations. We want to have the topics that you would not typically hear at the dinner table, or if you're not a person of color, if you don't understand them, we want to bring you in, right? We understand that, no, we're not blaming anybody. It's not your fault necessarily if you don't know. Now, if you're doing something because you want to, that's on you. But but for the most part, what I get, at least from a lot of my white friends, and this is also how Move the Needle started, because I called out my white male friends.
Yeah.
But what I get a lot of times is the majority of people are frozen with what to do.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to do the wrong thing, and I'm using air quotes with wrong thing, because someone of color is going to jump down their throat and say, no, you can't do that. That's the wrong thing to do. Or they continue to do something they think is right, and it doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
And so they get stuck in this point where, all right, I know in my heart and my head that something needs to be done. And I can't just continue to put money at the problem because that doesn't necessarily change things.
Mhm.
What do I do? So I just want to say that, folks, this is what we're here for. This is what Move the Needle is about. We want to bring this to you with understanding, with empathy, that we're all in it together. But now we need those of you who are not of color to be allies, because we all have skin in the game. Okay. So the difference for me between assimilation and inclusion, if you want to understand how to act, you want to celebrate differences. Let people be who they're going to be, right? Assimilation would be, well, if you just did this, or if you came to work a little bit less animated, you know, those are assimilation things that do not celebrate the differences of culture and the differences of people. Now, there are certain things as decorum, like you shouldn't, there's certain things you can and cannot do in a workplace, right?
Yeah.
There's certain ways that you should act in other ways. And I'm just talking about social norms, not cultural norms. But you can't ask someone to deny who they are. Like, you know, Black women have had a lot of issues with hair, right? They should now, professional can be a different type for everybody. But if you've got curly hair, let it be curly. What does their hair have to do with their job performance? Just a question. So I toss it to you guys. The conversation, assimilation versus inclusion.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of provide the definition for assimilation and versus inclusion. And I think it's really important to identify what those key differences are. And assimilation in a context of here in America, really lends itself towards others buying into a system, into a community, into a structure that will fit the larger community. So, for example, we talk about, Europeans coming to this land and them essentially being able to assimilate other cultures into their culture. So, we look at indigenous people, we look at enslaved Africans and freed Africans who have had to buy into a more Eurocentric culture in order to navigate through life, and I think, for the majority of people, they don't necessarily think of it as assimilation. They think of it as them being included. And I think there's a misinterpretation that happens where it is not inclusion. It is actually, people losing part of their history, losing part of their heritage in order to gain some value into this other culture. So I just wanted to kind of frame that out and get your perspective, Dakota, on how you feel assimilation has impacted you, your family, and in your community.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like mentioning that, you immediately brought up in my mind a memory from childhood, right? To focus in on the personal, so to speak. It reminded me of, I remember I was fairly young, and it was one of those things where my grandmother, who spoke like Spanish, English, French, right? Very, very intelligent woman. She was one of the first, she was, Afro-Latino. She was one of the first women of color to be the head of a medical lab in Los Angeles County, and possibly the state of California. I'm not sure that second one, but I know in LA County for sure. She worked at the hospitals here in LA. She was a virologist. She worked with disease and with blood work and all that stuff. Very, very intelligent woman. Very, very proud of her culture.
Yeah.
But I remember as a kid asking her, well, you know, how do I say these things in French? How do I say these things in Spanish? How do I, you know, teach me these other language?
Yeah.
And her saying, you know, no, you're American, so you learn English, because that's the country you live in. That's how you're going to get by, is by speaking English, speaking good, proper English. Right.
Yeah.
And that was such a just, it was one of those things where it's like, it felt like a betrayal, even to my young mind as a kid. You know, I was just like, this feels wrong.
Right.
You know, it doesn't feel like I should have to walk away from or remove my cultures and my languages to be able to fit in, you know, and to be able to get by. But at the same time, you know, she was my grandmother. She's teaching me. She knows best, you know. And so
she's giving you the tools to navigate, right?
Exactly. And she really was. She was in the best way she knew how, because of the generation she had come from.
Yeah.
This was the way she knew to best navigate, you know, for lack of a better phrase, the white world. You know,
that's a great point about what literally this conversation, assimilation versus inclusion, right? It in her experience, because you know, your culture and she was not being included. Well, how did I get my seat at the table? I got my seat at the table by doing this in English. And by doing that, that is assimilation. That's not inclusion.
No.
Wow. Man, so I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no. And that was,
I wanted to hammer that point home.
Yeah.
That was a huge
and
point.
that's, and that was something where, like I said, at the time, because of my age, I didn't know how to recognize that. But there was still just something innately within me that recognized, like, but this doesn't line up. This doesn't make sense.
Cutting something out to focus on something else. Why couldn't I do it in Spanish, English, and French?
You know, why can't I do it in any language, and regardless of what your background might be? You know, why can't I come to the table speaking Japanese, whatever it might be? You know, you know, I think, and it was just one of those things where it was, like you said, the difference between acceptance and inclusion is, why do I have to ignore or limit or remove a part of myself to have access to the things that we say are supposed to be written into our Constitution that we all have? You know, and so I think that that's something where, you know, like you said, in moving the needle, you know, from the generations that came before, not just from, you know, ancestors all the way back, we could, you know, have that whole conversation about the forced assimilation of our ancestors, as both on the African side as the indigenous side. But even just into more contemporary life, you know, that's 2 generations ago in my family, you know, my grandmother, you know. And so I think sometimes too, that's something that particularly people who are not from communities of color kind of lose sight of and don't understand the time frame. Right. Because especially too, when you think about how much even our more recent history with, you know, like the civil rights movement and everything like that, that was only the 60s, but all that footage is in black and white. And you think black and white way, way back, you know, but it's like no, my parents were born into a segregated world. You know?
Oh my gosh, Dakota, you were hitting it on the head, because I literally posted something. I shared a post. I believe it was my cousin or somebody, and I'd seen several people post about Ruby Bridges, right? She just turned 60 something. I'm losing it. 67, maybe something like that.
I'll say 67 or 68.
I think 67. Like, that's the point.
She's still young.
This is just,
she's still here.
Barely 2 generations ago, folks, when the school system was being integrated. So I'm gonna throw you guys a curveball. The integration with, you know, segregated schools. Was that really inclusion, or was that assimilation?
That was.
Anyone want to tackle that?
I mean, in my opinion, I don't, you know, like, I don't know that I have necessarily the chops to speak about it from like an academic standpoint, right? But I can say from my personal experiences and the, you know, kind of thoughts and opinions I've formulated because of that, I would say that leans much more heavily towards assimilation. Because it was never a standpoint of, well, we're doing this because this is how we move forward as a progressive society. This is how we include everybody at the table, right? The, air quotes, proverbial table, so to speak. This is how we give everybody opportunity and a voice to make up for the inequities of the past. It was just about, oh, well, for legality's sake, let's get this done, because then we can say, okay, well, we did this thing you were asking for.
Right. Woo. Mic drop. End of segment. No, I'm kidding. Not end of. JR, I was going to jump in, but JR, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I think Dakota, you hit it right on the head. About not necessarily, I guess, giving different cultures, and at that time it was black versus white, right? The civil rights movement was mostly looked at as a black and white issue, but there were multiple cultural inequities that were in action, whether you were of Japanese descent because of internment camps here, or you were being moved out of your historical land that your family was raised on, or we talk about the boarding schools again, right? About making sure that in order for different smaller groups of society, in order for them to progress in the manner in which the majority sees it, they need to get on board, whether it's through education or through some other mechanism. And I think it's really and the thing is that there's no general awareness about it, or there's no, I would say there's no urgency. There hasn't been urgency with the majority, to right the wrongs. Now we've seen, quite a bit of progression through, for example, black beaches, historical black beaches, whether it was in California. And I think there was recently, some beach property that was reclaimed by a family who had owned it. And I believe the city, took it away because it was
that's out here. That's out here in California. That's out here in LA.
Southern California. So I think the thing that I come away with every conversation that I hear about assimilation is that the broader scope of these issues aren't necessarily being heard by the majority, and how we can change that. So I think that's just one thing that kind of really continues to jump out at me, is that with each generation, that these conversations are being made and being had that are touching more people than they were 20 years ago, where we weren't having necessarily these conversations because it was too controversial. And we still run into that now, where for example, critical race theory, it's a hot button topic, but guess what? Critical race theory has been around for ever.
It shouldn't be a hot button topic, because it's not really a theory. It is history as a whole topic. It's one slice of history.
It's a field of study. It's it's literally like if you, because it's funny because you reminded me, and sorry to jump in, but you remind me of, I was actually just listening to a piece on NPR the other day where they were talking to one of the professors, and for the life of me I can't remember his name, and I apologize for that, but he was one of the professors that first coined the term and started using that, and it was like actually applying that to collegiate courses, like back in like the 80s. It was about a methodology to look at statistical things that were recorded, inequities that were in place across swaths of American society. So you're talking about like all the data we have nowadays about like inequities in housing, right, in education, in job markets, in healthcare, all those things kind of are there because people took it upon themselves to go, well, these are things we need to keep track of. These are things we need to look back at it. Why is it that this group has had so much less access to these things? And so it's not something that, it's such a hot topic issue, for a lot of people today, quote, and they're fighting out at it in school board meetings across the nation. But it's like, but they're not this is not what is going to be taught to your child in first, second, third grade. Right.
Right.
And let alone it's not. And the purpose of that whole process of study is not about saying this group is wrong and this group's bad for what it did against this group or that group.
Right.
It's just a way of looking literally at numbers and at data and saying, well, this is where we can make a correlation where if the numbers are lagging here versus this group, maybe there are inequities at play.
Right.
You know,
I think that's the huge point. Again, you Dakota, are you sure you haven't been on our podcast before? Because we literally did an episode last month about the cost of racism and literally laid out just a few statistics that went back to the 60s about salary and literally only kept it at black and white.
Yeah.
But yes, I wanted to say that the point you made a few points ago was huge about the inequity, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference between assimilation and inclusion. If it was real inclusion, I want the folks in the back to really hear this. If it's about inclusion, then the opportunities, the access, the money that is provided for different opportunities, right? For training, that kind of thing. That's what becomes equal.
Yeah.
That's how you include, right? You in inclusion in layman's terms, I guess, because you know that I'm a layman, of course. Inclusion means meeting somebody where they are. That's how you include somebody.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and tell JR and Dakota, well, you all need to be X, Y, and Z in order to be on this podcast with me. You also need to have done this, this, and this to be on this podcast with me.
Right.
No. Yeah. Right. You have
all these qualifiers, right?
Yeah.
Those are the hurdles, the qualifiers, you know?
Yep.
But yet you want me to go through these qualifiers, you want me to get all this done. And then when I get all that done, I still have to do this in a certain way once I've jumped those hurdles, and I still don't make as much or move up as fast or get the same opportunities. That's what assimilation is. You want me to be like you, but you don't want me to be with you, you know?
Yes.
Very similar to, I know we talked about the sports world in the first segment, NFL coaches, right?
Yep.
You've got the huge money maker in the NFL, merchandise, all kind of stuff. They have I don't know, I'm guessing at a generous number here, 70-80% of the players are of color, maybe even more.
Yep.
Yet we go up the ladder and just talking about head coaches, or further up the ladder, we talk about owners. Where's the inclusion?
Yeah.
Where's the equity there, right? Or let me say in a different way. Where's the representation? Right?
Yeah.
Representation matters. So if you have 70-80% of colors of the players of color, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a huge difference in getting my player to perform a certain way that I want them to perform as the coach. If I don't understand where they're coming from before they've even gotten to my team, right? That's a big deal. Now, hopefully you can be a smart enough person to then understand and be able to communicate with them. But it makes the communication bridge a lot easier if you understand and have a shared experience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And where's the access and opportunity for these brilliant coaches or even players who could to become coaches? Where's that? You know, when teams are sold, not frequently, but okay, you mean to tell me that there's no one who's a billionaire who is of color who can afford a team if they wanted to? I'm just throwing it out there, folks, for conversation.
I think it's also important. Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, you know, I think it's also important to identify that when people, and I'm saying this anecdotally, but when people talk about race, they think that everything is on a level playing field, right? You know, and we keep having to reiterate and to say that no, this is not a level playing field. When you hear people saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that is not a real thing, that happens outside of, in communities where there has been consistent under serving of resources and equity.
Well, to be fair, real quick, it's not even a real thing in the majority communities. Because if you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, then how did you start at a higher level already?
Right.
How did you have that great foundation with old money? Go ahead, JR.
Exactly.
Sorry,
so it's generational. No, that's a great point. It is an excuse that is constantly being used and promoted to disqualify someone who is trying to pull themselves up to make to have a better life, whether it's them creating a new business for themselves, or going to the educational system and trying to make a better life for themselves. But you always hear about just pull yourself by your bootstraps. Why do you have all these issues within your community and stuff like that? And I think that there's just this general scapegoatness that that people give to people who they see as less than, right? So
that's the assimilation part. That excuse you're talking about, that scapegoat. That's what if you could just do this. Okay, well, I've done that. Well, no, if you could just do this, how much do you want me to assimilate? Because I'm never going to be like you, right? But that's what we talk about. What's real inclusion? Real inclusion is understanding that let's take the three of us on this podcast right now. The three of us are different, just from the fact of I'm from the Midwest, Jared's from the East Coast, Dakota, you're from the West Coast. That's going to be a different experience already.
Right.
But I'm not asking you all to understand what cold and snow is like. I get that, and we're not sitting here saying, oh man, Dakota, you must be a surfer because you're on the West Coast. We're not saying that either, right? The difference is we're celebrating each of our differences in experience, but bringing it together to provide the awareness for anybody who's listening. That's inclusion, because everything that we're going to say is going to be a little bit different, although we have some shared experiences because we're of color. Or in the corporate world, man, inclusion is really looking at your employees for who they are, right? Across the board, who is the best candidate? Who's going to help the business move forward? Not, oh, well, they've been here the longest. So what if they've been here the longest? If they're the longest, are they the best candidate to move up? Right? It's opportunity. That's what inclusion is. Making sure the opportunities are there across the board, making sure compensation is there. And that means for people of color and in Black and brown communities, you got to dig a little deeper to get to that level playing field, because it's been unlevel for so long.
I mean, it kind of goes back to the comment you were talking about earlier, where we were talking about for Black women with their natural hair, right? That quote perceived notion from majority society of professionalism. Why, if it was really about inclusion and not about assimilation, then why is it that for this Black woman to be successful, she feels she has to straighten her hair out? Right.
Great
point. Why does she have to adhere to their ideas of professionalism, their quote standards of it? Right. Because if it's about inclusion, it's we see you for the capabilities you have, for the potential that you show, and for the work that you do. It shouldn't matter that she's got her hair up in a bun. It shouldn't matter if she's doing twists or locks or anything. Bantu knots, however she want to dress it up, however she wants to let her beauty show, her Black girl magic show with her hair. If she's doing the job, if she's putting in the work, if she's contributing to the company, and if she's the best person for that role, then that position should be available for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, guys. Any last thoughts on assimilation versus inclusion before we go?
Actually, I think I would kind of too like to mention a little bit on the fact of how I really, really love what I'm seeing right now in 2022 in the year that we're in, and even just in the last couple of years, kind of the pandemic, where because we were all stuck at home, so much of our conversations and so much of our kind of awarenesses about society moved to online, a digital space.
Yeah.
I really want to talk about the fact of how much I think it's so amazing how much you see, particularly from the younger generations. And I'm even talking younger to myself. I'm talking, people from like Gen Z and down, how the work that they're doing to put a lot of these issues in their social media feeds, in their TikToks, in their snaps, on their social statuses are constantly promoting and advocating inclusion, real inclusion, from the Afro-Indigenous community, the Afro Latino community, the Black community, the Asian community. All of our communities are coming together and saying, we've been divided, we've been separated, we've been told all the different reasons why we're different, why the same struggles don't apply, but we're here to tell you that they do. And I think that that's such a great thing to see. I think it's for me, it really lends me to a place of hope, of feeling like there is real progress that's going to be made going forward, because I know, just going back to my own life, looking at how I felt like, the LA riots were in 92, right? And it was like all of a sudden on the national stage, the treatment of us as community colors, and particularly, for Black folk at the hands of police, right? And then that conversation disappeared again for a long, long time on the national stage, and it was something where it was like, those conversations weren't happening again until I was in like my 20s, like my mid 20s. And, part of that was just the difference of technology that was available at the time. But part of it, I think, was a kind of, let's say maybe like a continued practice by our society and by the majority to kind of say, okay, well, yeah, that happened. It's kind of a hiccup on the road to equality, but really we're always moving forward. We're always progressing. We're always doing better, and we know that that's not really true.
Or it's just an isolated incident out there.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
We've never seen that where we are, which again, we know is not true. Also,
and I think it even kind of goes into, and it ties into the fact that a lot of times in the media and in social settings or public settings, the conversation can a lot of times be very black and white, and I always try to really advocate with, family members and friends and other people of color that I come across, that when one of our groups makes progress towards racial justice and equity, that's, even if it's, quote, not my people's struggle, air quotes, or not, my struggle, that's still progress towards justice, is still progress towards equity. And that very well will likely be laying the foundation for, quote, the next group to come along. Right. I think about, going kind of back to what we were talking about earlier with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement really laid the groundwork for the AIM, the American Indian movement of the 70s. Right. You talk about the civil rights 60s, AIM 70s. Right there. It was, we learned, because we had been there to help advocate and support when we could, to march alongside, our Black and brown brothers, saying, yes, this is needed. This equity is needed. This justice is needed. And then we took a lot of that same model and applied it in the 70s for a lot of the inequities that were happening within our community that were specific to our struggle, but were part of that overall branching fight against racism, and I see that still now a lot to this day, where it's like those trends are continuing. And I remember, in some of the marches and protests that Peaches and I participated in for the Black Lives Matter movement after the death of George Floyd, of how diverse a lot of times those marches were, where you had, white people in there, you had a lot of white allies that were there to support and really, felt the pain of it, even if they didn't know personally the struggle. Right. And you had members of the, Latin community, you had members of the Asian American community, the Pacific Islander communities, indigenous communities, of course. And there was a moment where in one of the marches we were participating in here in LA, we were down at the Justice Building, and they opened up a moment to allow people to kind of get up on the mic and talk about shared experiences and stuff like that, or personal experiences with, racism and those things. And it was so interesting to talk about, to see and to talk about. And I participated in that, of going up as members of, quote, different communities of color, and talking about the shared experiences that we have with racism and violence from the police in our own communities. And it was so funny to see how certain faces would kind of look over and go like, I didn't know that was happening to you guys too. And it was just one of those things where it was like, because, we talk all the time, and because it needs to be talked about, the violence of, police and police institutions against the Black community. But what a lot of times gets overshadowed in that conversation is that, for Indigenous and Native American peoples, we're right up there at the same numbers statistically. It's about a little over a 3-to-1 chance that a Indigenous person will be killed by a police officer as opposed to their white counterpart, so to speak. And then on top of that, you break it down further within our communities, it actually goes higher when you isolate it to just women. Native American women die at almost 5%. It's like a 4.8 or something like that. It's some weird, horrible number when you think about that. In essentially a 4-to-1 ratio, women are dying. Native American, Indigenous women are dying at the hands of police as opposed to their white counterparts. And the same thing, I know it's, the numbers are different and they vary. Same thing for Latin community, it's around 2%, and the Asian American community is a little bit lower. But it's just one of those things where it's like, those are things that we're all experiencing, right? And when we don't take those moments to share those stories with each other and to share that struggle that we have, that we share, that the nuances of that conversation can be lost. But on top of that, the ability to what's the word I'm looking for? But kind of to gosh, I don't know, I can't think of this word. I'm sorry.
No.
But we're to be able to empathize and to sympathize with each other, of saying like, oh yeah, this is a shared experience that we have. The specificities might be different, the historic foundation of it might be different, but it's something that we're both experiencing. And so this is all the more reason for us to advocate and support and include each other in this fight.
Wow.
Oh man, I don't
have anything to say after that.
Yeah, right. There's nothing else. No, Dakota, I thank you for like tying that up and wrapping that very neatly, because that's exactly what it's about, inclusion, and that's what you said it perfectly. So
thank you,
folks. Man, this has been another great episode of Move the Needle. We have appreciated you listening to us. Dakota, JR, and I have appreciated you being here on this episode with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, man.
Our pleasure.
You can catch us on Amazon, on Google, Apple, Spotify. There's a few other smaller platforms that you can listen to. Search Live All Good podcast, and you can find the Move the Needle episodes. Once again, we appreciate you being here, and we will get back with you next month.